with Shariah. And I'm very privileged to be playing a role as moderator. I don't know if I mentioned, my name is Frank Gaffney. I am the president of the Center for Security Policy. And we will enlist these three women. We hope to have a fourth joining us momentarily to join them in a conversation about different aspects of the ways in which Sharia interferes with and is really antithetical to the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I should say, as guaranteed under our founding documents. We will hear first from Noni Darwish. She is a woman who has fled Sharia in her native Egypt, who has experienced it, as I say, firsthand there and actually here. She has written extensively on the subject, including a book that talks about it in, I think, exactly the right ways. It's entitled Cruel and Usual Punishment, the Terrifying Global Implications of Islamic Law, or Sharia. She is the author most recently of a brand new book, very powerful, entitled The Devil We Don't Know, The Dark Side of Revolutions in the Middle East. We'll hear from Noni first, and then I will introduce each of our other speakers in turn. Let me just say it before we get too much further into the program. For those of you who are interested in learning more about Sharia, we have, as I mentioned, MuslimBrotherhoodInAmerica.com, but we also have a new website entitled The Shariah War On Women. .org, and I encourage you to take a look at it as well. Noni Darwish, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, my pleasure. This is a very important subject. This is not just another women's rights occasion to speak about. This is the real problem. Many women from the Middle East actually fled to America, fled to Europe, fled to democracies away from Sharia. I'm one example. Cynthia Farahat is another example. Many of us came to the West for rescue, to escape Sharia. But instead of escaping it, they followed us here. We have groups, many Muslim groups in the United States, in Europe, across the world. Wherever Muslims go, they follow us, and they start demanding Sharia again, the very law we escaped from. And they often say but these oppressions of Sharia is not really a legal thing. It has nothing to do with Islam. This is just a cultural thing. But this is as just simply a lie. It is the law of Islam. It is not just the culture of Islam. Our lives in America are threatened. There are girls that are being killed. It's coming here to a neighborhood near you. And we must speak out. And we must recognize the source. And you know, we have to really know what's going on. We cannot just look the other way and ignore it and say it's gonna resolve itself. It's not gonna resolve itself. Why does the culture of jihad hate women? Is this a coincidence? I don't think so. The culture of jihad is a culture of death. It has to dedicate its men to their number one duty as being a Muslim, which is to do jihad, to expand and dedicate their lives to death. What stands in the way for a man to dedicate his life to death is women. So women are the source of life in a society. They bring life to society. They want to protect life. They don't want to go to war. They want to stay and take care of their kids. So that by itself, women becomes a problem in the Muslim society. And they have to be pushed down. Their priorities has to be put aside. Their respect has to be put aside. And how does that happen? There are laws to corner women and make them dedicate them for the purpose of jihad instead of the purpose of making life in a society. For instance, there is no age limit for a girl to be married. She's a property. She doesn't even have to pick her husband. A girl of 8 or 9, when they get married, which is the law of Sharia, she has no say. She wants to go to play outside. And there's no age limit. A husband has the right to beat his wife under Sharia. So this sacred relationship between a man and a woman is totally violated by Sharia. A man who treats his wife well and fairly and respects her is ridiculed in a Muslim society. He's called not a man. He's not really a man. Why? Because a happy marital relationship is an obstruction for jihad. Even during Muhammad's time in the 7th century, men were encouraged to not have a happy home with their wives, with respect, equal rights. This is not encouraged. This is an obstruction to a culture of jihad and martyrdom. Divorce is only in the hands of men. Rebelliousness, these are all laws. Rebelliousness on the part of the wife nullifies her husband's duty and obligation to support her financially. And by rebelliousness, it doesn't mean a rebelliousness by the way the West think. No, it could be that she went to visit her mom without her husband's permission. Something like that. Or not cooking a satisfactory meal to her husband. That's the kind of rebelliousness that we're talking about. There's no community property in a Muslim marriage. There's a Muslim marriage contract, and I have a copy of that contract in one of my books, and it shows that a man is asked, please name an address of wife number 1, wife number 2, wife number 3, if any. So there is no loyalty expected from the husband under the Muslim marriage. Loyalty is only expected from the wife to the husband, not vice versa. So this by itself, this concept, really does not leaves a woman without protection at all in the marriage. So it's a buyer-seller relationship. You have to pay the dowry, and you get the wife, and she has to be totally obedient to the husband. Slavery was never abolished, and they're speaking about it today on national TV in Egypt, in Kuwait. There is a woman who's demanding the return of sexual slavery openly on national TV in the Arab world. Why? Because under Sharia law, slavery and sexual slavery of women is allowed. We're a piece of property in the legal system. Testimony of a woman in court is half the value of a man. So you put a man and a woman in a court against one another. Guess who wins? The woman loses custody of her children if she remarries. To prove rape, you have to have 4 male witnesses. Guess how many rapes are reported in the Muslim world? Practically none. And the rapist, a male rapist, this is not a crime, a major crime for a man under Sharia. And the rapist is to be required to pay only the dowry if he's caught raping a woman without marrying the rape victim. So he can pay her a dowry, and that which means some money. It's almost like she's a prostitute. A Muslim woman must cover every inch of her body, because her body, any part of her body is considered aura, which means a sexual organ. So that's how we are presented to society. We are seductors of men, and that's why it's our responsibility when a rape happens, that we are responsible for the rape. And that's what movies show us. That's what the sheikhs in mosques tell the men, that they are seductresses, and they blame us all the time when a rape happens. It's her fault. She seduced him. She did this. She did that. She smiled, and there are specific laws. A lot of Muslims in America, they say that there are laws. This is a cultural thing. Honor killing is a cultural thing. No. Wherever Islam goes, there is honor killing. And the reason is a Muslim will be forgiven for killing an adulterer, usually an adulteress, of course. So there is forgiveness to any person on the street if they kill a woman who's believed to be an adulterer. This is a law. Parents are not going to be prosecuted for killing their offspring, parents and grandparents. Those two laws by themselves encourage honor killing. Honor killing is practiced in almost every Muslim country, and the killers are never prosecuted. Very few of them go to jail. And it's always covered up. I've lived in the Muslim world for 30 years of my life. I have never heard a Friday sermon in a mosque where the sheikh says honor killing is against our religion. To the contrary, they always blame the woman, they always defend the man or defend the parents, and they always gang up against the dead woman as having done something wrong. So this is not a cultural thing only, this is a religious thing. It is enshrined in the laws of Islam, oppressing women, and actually domestic violence is enshrined in the laws of Islam and the culture of Islam, and it's intertwined, and it's very hard to get rid of. It's really time for the West to understand what are the consequences of welcoming Sharia, or even saying that Sharia is misunderstood. There is nothing misunderstood about a law that condemns women to stoning, to death, and to flogging, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Noni Darwish, thank you. I neglected to mention two important credentials Ms. Darwish brings to this conversation. One is she is a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy, of which we're very proud, and also the director of a wonderful organization, Former Muslims United, which gives voice and expression and support to people like herself who have, in fact, found refuge from some of these oppressive practices. I wanted also to mention, if I could, a book that is available here for those of you who may not have gotten it, that we produced at the Center for Security Policy with the help of Claire Lopez, who we hope will join us shortly, entitled Sharia, the Threat to America. If you want to know more about the sorts of problems that Noni has touched on, this is a wonderful resource, I think, brought to you by 19 very serious, thoughtful, knowledgeable individuals about both the doctrine of Sharia and the threat that it poses to the United States. Lest you think that the kinds of things that Noni has just described can't happen in a country like ours, I think our next speaker brings to this a fresh and very important perspective. Cynthia Farahat, as you may know, is a woman who has recently come here from Egypt as well. She was active in the so-called Arab Spring movement, having founded the Liberal Egyptian Party, worked as one of its leaders from 2006 to 2008, and saw firsthand what had begun to transform Egypt from a nation in which Sharia was nominally on the books but not fully enforced, to a nation in which it is increasingly now, and even more in the future in all likelihood, being subjected, the women most particularly, but the country as a whole, to this Sharia program. She is active both with the Center for Security Policy, where she is also a fellow, and with the Coptic Solidarity Organization here in the United States. She has been testifying on the Hill, and we're very pleased to have you with us. Cynthia Farahat, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's such a liberating experience to be talking about Sharia law in a free country. This is a luxury I did not have, so thank you, Americans, and thank you, CSP, for having me here. This is, although we were speaking against Sharia law since I was in Egypt, I've been doing that for the past 10 years because it's the moral, we felt morally obligated to stand against what's wrong and defend what's right. Women under Sharia law are not defined as citizens. They are not seen as citizens and not even full human beings. My friend, the renowned Coptic researcher Magdi Khalil, who's with us today here, once stated that a woman is half a person in Sharia inheritance law, and she's 1/4 of a human being in an Islamic marriage. So this pretty much defines the status of women. There are 4 Islamic schools of jurisprudence. We've got al-Shafi'i, al-Hanafi, al-Hanbali, and al-Malki. According to the jurisprudence of Ibn Hanbal, which is the major jurist for Sharia application in Saudi Arabia, he states in a book by Ala al-Din al-Mardawi, states in his book Justice that Ibn Hanbal said, "It's forbidden to legislate anything that conflicts with the interest of Muslims. When it comes to killing of the women and children, an imam, which is a Muslim jurist, chooses whether to kill them or keep them as livestock and slaves." These are the words of the Sharia jurist that the government of Saudi Arabia turns to legislate its laws. Let me please say this statement again because it is very scary. It is forbidden to legislate anything that conflicts with the interest of Muslims when it comes to killing of women and children. An imam, which is a Muslim jurist, chooses whether to kill them or keep them alive as livestock and slaves. So this is the definition of a woman under Sharia law. She's a domestic animal and a slave. And her ability to maintain her status as a good domestic animal will grant her life, but it will also grant her abuse, physical violence, rape. And if she decides to act differently and become a human being and incorporate free will in her actions, that will equal imminent death. She would no longer be considered part of the tribalism, part of the Islamist mental tribal society. She might be even condemned as an apostate, and sometimes she would be condemned as a kafir harbi, which is a militant infidel, and it all translates to a lot of horrific scenarios between torture, incarceration, and death. And that's how it feels to live in an Islamic state. Although Sharia law in a country like Egypt is not fully legislated, we have a law where it's Islamic socialism. You've got Sharia law in the constitution when it comes to family affairs, but they do not have the Islamic penal code, which is the stoning and the beheading and all that. Even when it comes as Ms. Darwish mentioned before, the plight of stoning of women. Stoning of women is a very interesting phenomenon to look at critically. Stoning is not just about sexual intercourse. It's about it's about punishing free will and consensual sexual intercourse and free will. That's what it punishes. Because when you look at Islamic jurisprudence, it allows a man to have 4 wives and 1,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000 sex slaves as malakat yamin, which is his right-hand possession. So the conflict here is not about sexual intercourse. It's about a consensual, free will and relationship between 2 adults. And of course, this poses a major threat against the Islamic totalitarian form of government. That's why it is always punishable severely by death. And this will bring us to the honor killings, where the Sharia apologists, as my friend Noni said, it's not a cultural aspect. What I mentioned before, that Ibn Hanbal legislates their killing or subjugating them as livestock, proves that it's not a cultural thing, but it's a Sharia thing. As I said before, the Muslim woman under Sharia law is not defined as a human being, and hence the discussion about necrophilia in the Egyptian parliament. Whether this argument took place in the parliament or not, it did not actually take place in the parliament, but in a committee inside the parliament, where they discussed the law of necrophilia that I'm sure a lot of people heard about. But I was actually very impressed when I read about it, because it was actually advanced. If you know Sharia law, you will see that these guys who legislated necrophilia were reformers, because what they stated was that you were only allowed to do it with your wife and for 6 hours. While this is reform, I'll tell you why. Because according to Islamic jurisprudence, like Matalib Ul Nahi fi Sharh Ghayat al-Muntaha, that's the name of the book that I will not even attempt to translate the title of it. And you also have Kafi, and I can give you 15 sources where necrophilia is legislated, but it's not discussed whether necrophilia is good or bad. They usually discuss it as, should we wash after we have sexual intercourse with a corpse, or should we pay their parents money for using the body? And it doesn't have to be a wife. So the Islamists in the parliament actually introduced a reformist version of necrophilia under Sharia law. I'm sorry, I had to say that. Okay. But as much as it's so grim and it is so devastating to analyze and just read about, I wrote a 600-page research about Sharia law that I'm going to hopefully publish by the end of this year. It's unfortunately in Arabic, but I'll get it translated. And I discuss all these sorts of things. But the good thing is, women are the most powerful warriors against Sharia law. When I was in Tahrir Square, I have seen strong Muslim women that said, we are not going to get stoned. And someone even joked about it and said, we chop them off and put them in freezers before they do this to us. So we heard some radical attitude, aggressive attitude against Sharia law from Egyptian women. Even back in January, the Salafist Noor Party started to have a squad, like a vice police squad, that would go around beating up women who would look like me. So what happened was in January, just before New Year's Eve, or after New Year's Eve, they attacked a hair salon filled with women, and they decided to scream at them and tell them that they are adulterers and they are performing prostitution by keeping their hair down. So, and engaging in this sort of thing. What happened was the reaction of the women was beating up the Salafists with chairs in the salon. And you've got the Salafist big guys with beards running down the streets screaming, and women with their rolls in the hair and they're getting their pedicures, beating them up in front of everyone. Okay, so yeah, we can do a lot. If you think Egyptian women living under Sharia law can beat up Salafi jihadists, and I personally have encountered this before, and I'm not very proud to say that I was, I attacked a Salafist, but not very violently. I just pushed him. But this kind of thing, this is the kind of attitude. You have to be a strong horse to reclaim your freedom, to claim your human rights and your dignity and your humanity. But the last thing I would like to mention, the Islamic war on the Shariah war on women, it's not just a side effect of being backward. It is a premeditated, well-organized, strategic war. When there is a secular Egyptian poet who is also an atheist, who once said, the mother is like a school. If you prepare her well, intellectually, you create a civilization. So what kind of school does Sharia law wants a mother to be like? A mother like the Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology that creates scientists and free people, or a mother like the Pakistani madrasa that produces fascists or slaves? That's the kind of equation we're in. The poor and women, the Muslim, the heroes, the heroic Muslim women I've seen in Egypt and in Tahrir Square made this choice. And they decided to be the kind of mothers that would resemble the Thomas Jefferson School for Science and Technology, and not the Islamic madrasa. And I hope that the American women decide to make this choice when they have the luxury to, without getting killed or beheaded for it. Thank you.
Cynthia, thank you. Let me anticipate a question by just saying something in introduction of Karen Lugo. As was made very explicit in our book, Sharia, The Threat to America, the practice of Sharia is not something that all Muslims engage in, certainly not in this country, and we believe in large numbers elsewhere around the world. We are not speaking of all Muslims when we discuss critically, and I think accurately, what those who do adhere to Sharia seek to do to women and other living beings. But we are talking about, unfortunately, what is the mainstream of Islam, not simply a faction of radical, extremist, fundamentalist, political Islam. And it is, I think, very much in the interests of the United States that those who do not subscribe to Sharia, who do not practice it themselves, do not seek to impose it on anybody else, are strengthened and are encouraged. And unfortunately, I must tell you, I think we're doing exactly the opposite. And that is very much the subject of this program that we talked about at the beginning, MuslimBrotherhoodInAmerica.com. I want to encourage people to take a look at that, especially against the backdrop of something that just happened this morning on National Public Radio, as you may have heard. Rashad Hussain, the president's, as he likes to call him, special envoy to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, was described by an NPR reporter as having paid a visit to Afghanistan, where he remonstrated with the mullahs there that anyone who reads the Quran understands that it decries violence against innocents, and the killing of them is impermissible. Well, that is taqiyya. And anybody who has actually troubled to read the Quran knows that it is an act of lying for the faith. And so it brings me to our final panelist and lesson until Claire Lopez is able to join us. Karen Lugo, who is, I think, one of our country's leading practitioners of constitutional law, and particularly in defense of the freedoms against those who would seek, as we've just been told, to bring Sharia here and infringe upon those rights. She is the founder of the Libertas West Project and co-director of the Center for Constitutional Jurisprudence. She is an adjunct professor at Chapman Law School, where she teaches the Advanced Constitutional Law Clinic. She is a sparring partner on the debate program in the PBS local affiliate in Orange County, Inside OC, and a frequent contributor to a number of outlets, including Family Security Matters. I admire Karen enormously as a courageous proponent of exactly what we've just been talking about, protecting American women against the war being waged against them, or that would be waged against them if we allow Sharia to be brought here. Let me remind you again of the website, for those of you particularly who've just joined us on the live stream, where you can find out a lot more information on all of this. It is www.theshariawaronwomen.org. Karen Lugo, it's great to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I am an attorney and work very closely with attorneys, very high-level attorneys in Europe, as well as talk frequently to judges in Europe. So I will be commenting on Sharia in Western culture in Europe and in the United States. And I have just completed a survey of American family law, both published and unpublished cases, and profiled both the judges who got it right and the judges who decided to rubber stamp the aspects of Sharia in the court decision. So, as we're here today and we think about what it is to be American and how Americans are so entitled to our constitutional liberties and our sense of the Declaration of Independence mandates, our sense that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is assumed for us. But it is not necessarily assumed for people that live within our own culture. In the name of multiculturalism, we have allowed within our own country and in Western European countries groups to form where the idea of the pursuit of happiness for a woman is something entirely different than what I was born to enjoy. For a woman, the idea of pursuing happiness is about dreams and romance and goals and vision, maybe career, maybe family, education. When it is a matter of a woman under Sharia, these things are often dictated and chosen by the man in the household. And a lot of this is clerically driven by an imam within the community. It is very difficult for Americans often to understand this and to understand that this is happening within our own country. Now, the majority of Muslims in America, we understand, are Muslims who fully participate in Western values and freedoms. But there is increasing pressure from the strict Sharia activists to require these Muslims to conform. When we're looking at this campaign that's underway in America now to convince all Americans, in fact, it's a $3 million campaign driven, much of it will be over this coming summer, to convince Americans that the Constitution and Sharia are perfectly compatible, that there is no difference. In fact, I have just written a column countering one of the Muslim scholars that is profiled, who claims that American founding principles actually came through John Locke, who was, they claim, inspired by Islam. And so going back to source material, which I did, I discovered the fraudulent. I mean, there is nothing, this is not based on anything other than speculation about whether Locke studied with someone who didn't believe in the Trinity, which is also a tenet of Sharia. So there could be no tripartite God within Islam. So making these very flimsy connections, but if one does not go back and challenge this, these claims are being made, and along with the idea that normative values of the Constitution and Sharia are the same. Now, I have challenged some of the Muslim scholars and said, what do you mean by normative, and how is Sharia in compliance with U.S. constitutional values? And of course, the answers are the very vague. We all believe in justice, fairness, happiness, equality. But as soon as it comes to some hard questions, which I'm going to bring up later, there are no clear answers coming from these leading American Muslim scholars. So nothing could be farther from the truth than to claim that Islam and the foundations of Sharia, as practiced as a strict way of living, would be the same as American constitutional concepts. When Sharia, and this is freely admitted by most Muslim clerics, even in the U.S., Sharia governs every aspect of one's life. So familial, community, civic, there is no authority or no submitting to a rule of law or no joining, as we do in America, by consent to be governed under a rule of law. So the two models are completely at conflict from the very, very, very beginning of the way that they're formed. Also, consider the fact that we call a lot of what relates to Islam honor killing. There's now a new phenomenon in Arab states, now more manifest in Turkey, honor suicide. But the word honor is a misuse of the word. It is shame-based in a sense that the Muslim man is judged according to the way his family comports themselves. So if the woman doesn't dress the way she should, talk the way she should, think, behave the way she is expected to, this reflects on the man. So it is entirely shame-driven. And this is a difficult concept for Americans to understand. When women are arranged, when the marriages for a woman are arranged when she is underage, the marriage is arranged by a man, sometimes not even her father. The settlement is prearranged should there be a divorce. And so we're looking at a process where from beginning to end, and this is occurring in America, as well as these marriages are coming into America with immigrants that come here. So when these marriages present themselves in our courts for adjudication, they often have not even been a civically recognized marriage, and the fact there is no license. The imam is not often licensed either. So there's nothing official or formal about this marriage. And when we have judges, including appellate level judges, looking at this as a contract and saying, we would like to, because we want to accept other cultures. We would like to accept this arrangement and respect the fact these two people made an agreement. This is where we are beginning to see an institutionalization of what is happening in Europe and the Sharia as it's coming here. Because there are so many marriages now coming into our courts, there is a crisis as to how judges, and there is a pretty even divide between those that are recognizing these agreements under the Sharia terms and others that are saying these do not comport with American sense of informed bargaining, consent, all of the things that when you're entering a contract governed by American law would prevail in our system. So this is something that in America we have to watch closely. Also, when we're looking at other Western countries, what has happened and developed more quickly in Europe than so far in the United States is this sense of embedded communities. So that we all understand that in France and parts of the United Kingdom, most notoriously, there are Sharia communities surrounding most of the cities. Within these communities that are governed essentially by Sharia law, there is an entirely separate sense of law. And Germany just woke up to this fact this last fall. This had happened quietly, and to the at the point that most Germans were living their lives and not understanding that within these cultures, subcultures, that there was an entirely different legal system that is governed by a kind of tribal sense of negotiation, family status, and that within this culture, German law does not have anything to do with the verdicts that are rendered. So how does this impact? We have this laissez-faire sense of, well, live and let live. Why, let people live the way that they choose to live. The problem is that within a society, a Western culture, you cannot have two prevailing legal systems side by side. Ultimately, there will be a breakdown of what we in our country have agreed to be governed by, which is this consent to live under a rule of law, not of men, not of clerics. So if in fact a case in point, and this is an extreme one, but just overnight in England, a news story was published about the fact that 9 men have been convicted for luring underage girls, 47 of them, into situations where the girls were either invited through chatting or, drinks or, but a friendly kind of a conversation started, and they found themselves in sexual situations where one 13-year-old was raped up to 20 times. These girls were passed to multiple partners, and in fact, the British authorities are looking for an additional 40 men. So when there is a breakdown of the rule of law, and you have two different systems with a level of respect for women that is entirely foundationally different, it is something that cannot be tolerated within a free system such as ours. Also, just very briefly, my last point, and this is something I've just begun to study, the introduction of polygamy to a Western culture on the level that Great Britain has seen it, where there are now, and these figures are hard to determine because the government has not been good at learning them, maybe doesn't want to know them, but it according to social workers in England, there are 20,000 polygamous relationships, marriages with possibly 100,000 people living within those. But the women are registered as single women because these marriages are off of the legal charts. They're, done through the Muslim arrangement so that they are not showing up as official marriages. And these women then are on the welfare rolls. They are brought in as immigrants, often as nannies, and then they stay. And so there's also a phenomenon occurring where the Muslim men are marrying British women and converting them. But these homes now, the welfare system is supporting 3 and 4 homes per family with these children. And what is occurring is that these children are alienated from their parents. The father doesn't have time to spend with 15, 20 children. It is a very, very difficult situation. And the numbers, again, the U.S., it's hard to know. The last numbers published were that a total of upwards of 120,000 in the U.S. were likely living within a polygamous situation. This is something, again, that is a matter of recognizing it. What I am advocating as I speak and write on these matters is having the discussion to shut down this debate in the West and in the United States, and to call it Islamophobic is going to ultimately be our undoing. We must be talking about this. I don't expect help to come from the politicians or the courts. I think this is a matter of within the community. We need to be defining what it is to be an American and what it is to immigrate, but what it is to live within our communities under the rule of law that we have chosen through our elected and the officials that we have voted on. So I do challenge Muslim officials. I do visit local mosques. I work with people in my community. We have these conversations. And I challenge today Muslim leadership in the United States and the communities in which they live. We must ask them, if you are proposing, which they are trying to do, that Sharia in the U.S. will be different than it is in Arab states, if indeed it is a matter of different culture, then why will you not denounce and repudiate and criticize in clear terms the persecution, massacre of Christians, the mistreatment of women? It is, every time I ask this question, I am given some morally relative, completely not relevant answer about how other abuses occurred, and Westerners were responsible for those. I cannot get a clear American Muslim answer on, yes, we denounce what is done in the name of Islam in these other situations. So that is my challenge today. I am very excited about the work that people like Dr. Zuhdi Jasser do with American Muslims to teach Western values to young Muslim leaders, and to also emphasize separation of mosque and state and American constitutional principles. I'm very pleased to be part of this website effort, www.theshariahwaronwomen.org, and that is Sharia with 2 H's. And also there are signs available for those that are involved in any public kinds of conversations. And this program is occurring all through this summer on Sharia and the Constitution. And so there are signs available to take to these kinds of events to challenge, to bring these questions out and to say, how do you respond to these issues, and what in American culture can we expect from our Muslim communities? Also, there is a petition to present to President Obama the same kind of question, and to ask for clear support for women who are under Sharia, and to recognize that there needs to be a clear definition of what it is to live in America as a Muslim. So thank you very much for having me here.
Karen, thank you. I must say, as a man, I am appalled by what I'm hearing. I can only imagine, if I were a woman, how frightening these kinds of warnings are. I hope they're being taken to heart. Let me make just 3 quick points, and then we'll open it up to questions from those of you here, and hopefully those who are able to call in. First and foremost, Karen mentioned at the concluding part of her remarks that she's not residing much confidence in our legislators or courts. Let me just read a quick quote that was given to us to read on his behalf by Congressman Frank Wolf, one of the legislators, I'm happy to say, who is taking these sorts of issues seriously and is working on them in the House of Representatives, who couldn't be with us today because he's got his bill on the floor at the moment. He says, quote, "I appreciate the Center for Security Policy hosting this event today, and particularly for your focus on the growing challenge of honor violence in the United States. I have included language in the FY 2013 appropriations bill that is on the floor this week that would, for the first time, direct the Justice Department to start categorizing and tracking instances of honor violence in this country. This is an important first step to helping elevate awareness of these serious and often deadly crimes. I'm grateful for the leadership of Mr. Grandy, Fred Grandy, our colleague at the Center, and Frank Gaffney, and the entire Center staff on these issues," unquote. I commend the congressman. I wish that others in the Congress were being as active. We've recently had, as you may know, the Senate enact legislation reauthorizing, updating the Violence Against Women Act. The House of Representatives is, I believe, going to be doing that in the next few days. As best I can tell, no effort has been made to establish in that Violence Against Women Act that there's no exclusion for religion as a justification for engaging in the kinds of violence that you've heard are actually obligatory under Sharia. That would seem to me to be a fix that is absolutely necessary if that law is to have meaning in this kind of setting. Courts. We've done a study at the Center for Security Policy, another website, if I may leave that with you, ShariaInAmericanCourts.com. It is a fascinating study. Karen mentioned one she's done as well. It talks about the extent to which, in fact, judges are allowing Sharia law to be utilized to resolve disputes, many of them in the family law practice, always to the detriment of women or women and children. Occasionally in non-family practice matters as well, increasingly probably in the future. But this is evidence of what we discuss both in this book, Sharia, the Threat to America, and in our course, Muslim Brotherhood in America, as what the Muslim Brotherhood calls civilization jihad. It's a creeping, stealthy, inexorable effort to introduce this doctrine as a parallel program, as Karen said, which inevitably means that the Constitution of the United States is not the supreme law of the land, which by its own terms, Article 6, it is and must be. Finally, let me just say that I believe that people like Rashad Hussain are enabling this civilization jihad from positions inside or influential with the Obama administration. In our program, MuslimBrotherhoodInAmerica.com, we have a dossier of Rashad Hussain's close, long-standing connections to the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm sorry to say he's not the only one. We found 6 worth really dwelling on in this, who are either working on the payroll of the United States government, are advising the United States government, or are being used as Muslim outreach liaisons by the United States government with ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. This is the enemy within. And I believe it greatly contributes to the kind of effort that I've just described and these women have really detailed in very, very important detail, is at work inside the United States of America, not just Europe, not just the Middle East and elsewhere, but here as well. So with that, let me just say, please check out these various resources. The Shariah War On Women.org is one. MuslimBrotherhoodinAmerica.com is another. Sharia, the Threat to America. The book can be downloaded for free at ShariahTheThreat.com. And, of course, not least, ShariahInAmericanCourts.com. All very valuable resources, we hope, for the edification of the American people and, as Karen so eloquently said, alerting them to a danger before it's too late. With that, let's open it up. Are there questions from you here or any that might be on the line? Anybody here? Yes, ma'am.
What can ordinary moms do to help on this? Mother's Day is coming up. If I'm concerned, but I don't know what to do, what are the next steps? What can I do?
I think it's very important that Americans stop the fear of being called Islamophobe. A lot of American moms don't want to touch it because they are very sensitive to the word you're Islamophobe. But I don't, Sharia is not only affecting or influencing Muslim women in America. Eventually, it will spread to the rest of society. In Europe today, there are some areas where European girls are walking and covering their head just to avoid being intimidated. And so, the ordinary American woman should understand that we're all linked with each other, and whatever affects Muslim women will eventually affect all society. Speak out. Don't be intimidated by being called Islamophobe, because Sharia law is not a religious right. It's not a religious right of somebody to kill me for honor. This is not a right. This idea that there is a law that oppresses women, that nobody should talk about because it is the religious right of somebody. Don't be intimidated. It's not a religious right. And this war on Muslim women by Sharia is the war on all women. And that's very important.
Cynthia?
Yeah, I think anyone that would call someone who speaks out for the truth to defend their own life and liberty, that would call us Islamophobes, I would call them a gynophobe, because they hate women and it's just about who we are. But I also need to make it very clear to American women that in the 1970s, Egyptian women were the American women today. When I look, my mom keeps a skirt in her wardrobe, and the skirt is literally this big, okay? And she used to wear it on public transportation because that's what everybody else wore. I think it would be too much for Washington, D.C. I would wear it on a beach, but that's what everybody else wore in Egypt in the 1970s. No one ever thought that they would be veiled and their faces thrown, acid thrown on their faces, because they will look different. So American women right now are Egyptian women in the 1970s. 30 years later,
can happen.
Saudi funding, it's not too far. When you look at Europe is so much closer to this right now. Europe is Egypt in the 80s. They're slowly approaching this model. In 2005, I debated a radical jihadist Islamist who told me, I have 20 kids, and most of them are out of wedlock, and they're all by infidel white women, and all the kids are Muslim. So those 20 kids in 20 years are going to be voting, and because it's Allah's justice, the welfare state is funding it all. So The welfare state is sort of the bicycle or the vehicle that Sharia law rights to metastasize.
Karen?
Very briefly, free speech is our greatest tool. And so speaking out, speaking up, challenging this for middle school parents, watching the textbooks, don't be afraid to advocate for defining American culture. There is something very exceptional about the country in which we live and the contract, our constitution under which we live. And so defining that and promoting that as the standard is something that we all need to be doing. So there are letters to the editor. I testify before many city councils. Oftentimes, city council members are asked to apologize for having said this or that. But the pressure on free speech in this country is where we will begin to lose our freedom to have this debate first. And that is where we must be very, very aware and very outspoken in defending what it is to be an American.
And just on that point, unfortunately, Rashad Hussain, who we've been talking about representing the United States in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or I think probably more accurately representing the OIC in the United States, is promoting an agenda that is directly at odds with free speech. There is a resolution that has been promulgated in the United Nations at the insistence of the OIC. It was sponsored by the United States government under President Obama in 2009 in an earlier version, and it is absolutely antithetical to freedom of speech. And this is why Karen's absolutely right, that we've got to hold that line and use it now while we can. Is anybody else? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Yeah, this is primarily for Karen. You know, in the United States, we have any number of religions, you know, fringe or otherwise, which also subjugate and abuse in the name of their religion. Why is it important to single out Muslims?
It's not a matter of singling out Muslims, and because I'm so closely associated with what's happening in Europe and aware that what is happening with Islam in this, I call it Islamist because it's an activist agenda, so I'm only talking about the radicalized, the strict Sharia version. It is hegemonic, it is totalitarian, it expands, it wants to be institutionalized, it will demand to be recognized. So sure, we have other kinds of marriages where we give freedom to make this arrangement. They often may not register, but when they come to our courts and want American secular courts to adjudicate that divorce, then they have to understand it's time to respect American law. So all that we're saying, and certainly from a legal perspective, what I'm saying is that it is not a matter of special recognition. And we have all these examples of whether it's hijab in the ROTC or the teacher that wanted to. I've dealt with these issues in depth. And this is a matter of a very activist agenda where once these communities are established and we look at Europe, we know what happens when it's institutionalized and then begins to make demands. And that's why these two parallel legal systems just cannot exist side by side because they're antithetical to each other.
There is one point I'd like to make to you. You're comparing Islam to other religions, so why are we picking on Islam? For me, I was born a Muslim, and I know that Islam is not just a religion. And nobody likes to criticize religion, any religion. Frankly, a religion is supposed to be a relationship with God. But if religion assumes the role of the state, which Islam does, and if that religion has a very elaborate legal system that controls every aspect of your life, then that religion has opened itself to criticism. So it's not me who wants to criticize Islam. It's Islam because of assuming the role of government and using the government to enforce a certain kind of law on all people of that country. For instance, in Egypt, Christians are very much affected by the laws of Islam. So Islamic law does not end with Muslims. It affects all citizens. And it's a very oppressive, that I cannot even find a religion, any other religion, that uses this modus operandi. What other religion uses the state to humiliate, kill women, and oppress them. There isn't any. Unfortunately, it's only Islam. Where are Buddhists? I don't see Buddhists in America who are trying to go and use the government and use a separate legal system. Hindus, I don't see them do that. And our constitution clearly separates mosque, church and state. So it's a lot of Americans fall into that trap of saying, well, why are we picking on Islam itself? Islam opened itself to criticism because it assumed the role of government.
Can I ask Cynthia to just also comment on that as,
Yeah,
as
just
a
a
person who
brief-
has experienced this?
Yeah, just a brief
Practice.
comment, because when Christians and Buddhists or atheists or whatever commit immoral crimes or evil crimes, they are considered immoral and illegal by their own ideas and by their own constitution and laws in their countries. But when an Islamist does it in Egypt, it's considered both moral and legal, and
It's a criminal act.
that is the strongest aspect that we should be looking at.
If I could make one additional remark, when I talked about the teacher wanting to go on Hajj, we do accommodate religious requests. It was the excessive amount of time during her first year under contract. It's always that incremental pushing the envelope that is what we're talking about. It's not a normal accommodation, and so I went through the court history on those cases. But that was my point, is that it was excessive.
Being a Muslim also is not just a relationship with God. Being a Muslim is a relationship with the state.
Yeah.
It's a contract with the state from birth, where they stamp your birth certificate Muslim, and your student, your passport, and you have to be a Muslim. If you leave Islam, you must be killed. All the schools of Sharia condemn you to death if you leave Islam, and women are treated as second-class citizens under the laws of Islam. So our life, our liberty, our happiness, pursuing happiness for a Muslim woman is practically against the law, which is her own will. So this is what I'm talking about.
We have a number of other questions that we're going to come to. Let me just, if I may, just amplify on this one point, because I think it comes back to how do we deal with this threat? If you appreciate that what we're dealing with is not the religion, because, as I said earlier, there are lots of people who practice their religion without conforming to this program or seeking to impose it as it insists it be done on everybody. But you're focusing on what is, in fact, a political and legal and military totalitarian program. Well, far from having to respect and protect it under our Constitution, it can be seditious and treated as such, which involves prosecution instead. So it's really important that we be clear about the nature of what it is we're talking about here, which I think is Shariah. Yes, sir.
So how do you deal with, and I'd like to hear all the panelists, how do you deal with a skeptical American public who says, oh, that's only happening over in Muslim countries, it will never happen here, this is just Chicken Little, the sky is falling, because they don't see the threat is going to really ever happen here in the great U.S. of A.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because in the 7th century, there were two superpowers in the Middle East, and it was Persia and the Byzantine Empire. Egypt used to have queens. We used to be ruled by women, Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, Cleopatra. Women were ruled with an iron fist, and they were very respected. Islam conquered Egypt in the 7th century, a superpower, and incrementally, we never had a queen after that. So, the passage of time on a country does not necessarily bring positive progress. It can take it backwards. So that's what I'm talking about America, is that the American people usually think we're too big to be conquered. We're too strong. Our culture is the freest. It can never be taken away from us. While there are other superpowers in history, Persia and Egypt, as an example, Byzantine Empire, and Egypt never saw its glory days again. Women have been oppressed after 3,000 years of rule of women as queens. It can happen. And a lot of Americans cannot believe it can happen. But in 30 years, we can leave a civil war to our children in America, to our girls in America, who will be scared of walking in certain areas without covering their heads, lest they get acid thrown on their faces. So it's hard to believe it, but it has happened in history.
Well, and you're
it
seeing,
it can happen again.
as Cynthia just said, you're seeing it in Egypt now.
Yeah.
Cynthia, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, you also have in Islam, the best way to combat Islamism is teach Islamism. You have to understand the theological concept in Islamic jurisprudence that discusses gradualism. And Khairat al-Shatir, who was the former presidential candidate for the Muslim Brotherhood, gave a long speech last year about the theology of gradualism, how you target a house, a person inside a house, that he would want to be governed by Sharia law in his marital affairs. And then the whole family, he would subjugate the whole family to submit to it. And then he would go out to his community center and to his college. This is a Soviet-style stealth program, long-term vision, fighting Americans and Westerners with weapons they do not comprehend and they do not use. You always have to so the best way is educate about the mode of operation and methodology of how this is done.
Karen?
I just wrote a column for National Review Online about the Danish Supreme Court decision that acquitted Lars Hedegaard of a hate speech crime. In most of Europe, hate speech is a criminal action with penalties, either a fine or imprisonment. And all he had done is speak with a journalist, not knowing he was being recorded, and then without having an opportunity to review his remarks, those were published out of context. And so the courts, the Office of Public Prosecution found that those remarks were hateful, although they were based on a statistical study of misogyny in Muslim neighborhoods. So we are in Western culture in a shocking state where we don't have the ability to discuss these things, even if basing it on observations of a cultural phenomenon. I experienced some of this in the United States, in California, last year, as I was involved in an effort to let a community know that a virulently hateful Muslim imam was in the area, and he's public record. It's easy to understand what a destructive force this person is. I had hundreds of students rallying to have me fired from my teaching position, a lot of pressure on the community. Orange County Human Relations Commission decided that there should be a meeting convened to censor or condemn our speech. And yet we weren't the ones, we affirmed moderate Muslims 16 times during the program, the rally. So there was a clear distinction being made, and nobody wanted to talk about the radical imam and what the message he was bringing that night to this group of Muslims. So this is what the concern is in our Western culture in America, is that we just do not have the freedom to even talk about this, and we must do it.
Yeah. And just on this point, what Cynthia just said is so critical. If you want to understand what's going on, you have to understand what Islamism is. And so when you hear that the FBI and the military and the Homeland Security Department are now implementing guidelines that say you will not teach, effectively, you will not teach about Islamism. You will teach only and train only according to what basically the Muslim Brotherhood says we can know, we can understand, we can think, we can do. So it goes right back to this freedom of speech at the most central level of government, namely protecting us against these sorts of threats. Yes, sir, in the back.
I just want to add something to what Noni said. Islam is not the religion and the state. Islam is the state and the religion. It's a big difference between the two concepts. So a religion support state, and state protect religion. So we evaluate the religion, the state by the tools of state. So it's legal, it's common to evaluate the state by the tools of the state. Another thing that he mentioned, the Arab invasion or Islamic invasion destroyed the seventh oldest civilizations in the Middle East. So can reach anywhere in the global.
Indeed. Yes, ma'am.
It destroyed Nubia in
Yeah.
Sudan
Yes.
too.
Exactly.
I wanted to talk about the compatibility issue again. And first of all, let me say thank you all so much. And Cynthia, I'm glad you went after the Salafists. On the compatibility, I heard Imam Rauf talk about that, and he compared Sharia to the founding fathers and also to Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount. And that was a bit much for me. But the problem is our churches in America are going along with this too. And I wanted to see what you all thought about. Are you seeing any comprehension on the part of U.S. churches, or are we lost there too?
I was very vocal in calling for American churches to speak out on behalf of Pastor Narkadani. I call him Pastor Yusuf because that was easier for people to spell. But I was very, very involved with Jay Sekulow and his organization profiling the plight of this man. And yet I felt that there definitely was not the level of interest when Americans could be in solidarity standing with someone who is persecuted. I was disappointed by the level of response from Americans, and maybe it still is a matter of being aware that the threat is not just in Iran.
Very important that whenever Americans speak, or when I speak, really, we're not criticizing the Muslim people.
Sure.
And that's the point that we must emphasize. We're against an ideology and a legal system that oppresses people, especially women, and it oppresses their quality of life, their pursuit of happiness, their liberty, their freedom. Under Sharia law, a woman cannot leave her house without her husband's permission. And I'm not saying that all Muslim men will do that. I mean, under Sharia, a man can beat his wife. It's legal. You cannot call the police if you live in Egypt and say, my husband is beating me, because it's legal for him to beat her. But what we're against, not the people. And that's why Americans are so embarrassed to speak against this ideology, because immediately the Islamists, attack on the basis of you hate Muslims, or you're attacking Muslim people. We're not talking about people. We're talking about the ideology. And we have a right as Americans to speak against ideologies and religions. No ideology should be above criticism. No religion is above criticism. The day there is a religion above criticism is the day we lose our freedoms completely, men and women.
Could I just add that, again, the course that we've produced, the Muslim Brotherhood in America, The Enemy Within, specifically speaks to the churches as a very, very high priority target for the Muslim Brotherhood's civilization jihad. And unfortunately, as has been indicated, they are not entirely clear that when this bridge building, as it's often called, or interfaith dialogue, as it's often called, is employed, it is actually for the purpose of achieving political cover for these imams, their mosques and their program, their centers, and also for bringing Islam to these churches, the dawah. In fact, I thought you might mention in connection with this incrementalism milestones by Sayyid Qutb, one of the principal ideologues of this movement, talks about the chasm between the believers and the unbelievers is so vast that no bridge can be built to span it, except for the purpose of bringing the unbelievers to Islam. So whenever people of faith in particular, hear people talking about building bridges, think of it as a one-way bridge.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You'll get it right.
And also, a lot of the Muslim sheikhs and the apologists for Islam in America, they want to convince you that you Americans, that they are for freedom, for democracy, for women's rights, for respecting equal rights for Christians. But when they attack churches in Egypt, for instance, they stone women in the Middle East. I'm not seeing them rally against these actions in front of why don't they rally in front of the Egyptian embassy and say enough killing of Christians and raping and kidnapping Christian girls? They are totally focused on one thing, convincing you Americans that they are just like our Constitution. Islam is a religion of peace. Don't worry, Sharia is totally compatible with your way of life. But they never, for instance, just very recently in Saudi Arabia, the top religious leaders in Saudi Arabia issued a fatwa that all churches in the Middle East should be destroyed.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a big thing for a top religious leader in Saudi Arabia to declare that all churches should be destroyed in the Middle East. Where's the news? Nothing. And where are the Muslims in America who are saying Islam is a religion of peace? Where are they? They are trying to convince you that Islam is a religion of peace, but they are not offended at all by their religious leaders, top religious leaders in the Middle East, condemning Christians and their churches for destruction. They are not doing anything. They're not even issuing a statement, an official statement condemning what this sheikh said. Nothing. So what are they trying to convince us with? We'd be fools if we believe them.
I think there is one group that has emerged, and Noni, I think you've been important in its work. American Islamic Leadership Coalition has been condemning these sorts of things, but it stands in stark contrast to what we're endlessly told is the Muslim American leadership, which is, as best I can tell, pretty much without exception, actually Muslim Brotherhood, affiliated or owned and operated. And when you understand that piece, you get a perfect explanation of why you're never going to hear them condemning
But they condemn
Sharia
it in
or their
America.
privilege.
They don't send a letter to Al-Azhar University condemning what's happening. They don't send a letter to the Sheikh in Saudi Arabia, write an article in Saudi media against what he said. They do it for show to America.
If they do it at all.
If they do it at all.
But
It's very
tell the story
generic.
about your letter where you asked them
Yes.
about apostasy.
Yeah, well, I am condemned to death because, and I cannot visit my country of origin. I'd be killed before I step out of the airport because I am an infidel. I've left Islam. And we had the case of Rifka Barry, and after that, we decided to get together, Wafa Sultan and many other people who left Islam in America because we're all living in fear. And there is strength and power in getting together. So we started our organization, Former Muslims United. And to expose that our civil rights are being threatened in America, right here. We wrote a pledge, a letter, and we sent it to all Muslim leaders in America, about 160 letters at least, asking them to sign it. And in this letter, all we wanted is them condemning the killing of apostates. Not one person responded. The only people who responded and signed the letter were Zoti Jasser and Ali Eliami, both reformists and both are great men that I have a lot of respect to. But all other groups, they just ignored the letter. Nobody wanted to sign a letter condemning the killing of apostates in America. These are the same people who are standing and saying Islam is a religion of peace and we don't like violence and terrorism. Well, why don't they sign the letter?
Right. We probably can just take one more question. Let me go into the back.
I was wondering whether the head of ISNA was actually sent that letter. He's speaking at Georgetown on Monday about religious freedom and minority rights in Muslim countries, which is almost laughable. But I wanted to
Yes.
see if he signed that letter and if he's been specifically pressed on this issue.
Yes, I would appreciate it if people ask him a question. Why haven't you signed? First of all, the letter was very. It was just asking them, do you believe that killing apostates is a good thing? And if you don't approve of it, please sign the letter. That's very simply.
Take a
the
copy
letter.
of the letter. We've been doing
Please,
that.
I would-
and
I would-
because they'll say, I don't remember seeing it. That's
Yes.
been the response that
Yeah,
I
I
have
don't.
heard.
Yeah, but they have never. First of all, it was never even returned to us, and the letter, and they've never responded. They ignored it completely.
The answer to your question is Mohammed Majid, the president of the Islamic Society of North America, did indeed get that letter, is among those who did not respond. He is the president of that organization. He is also the imam at what has been described as the second most dangerous mosque in America, the Adams Center Mosque, all Dulles area Muslim society mosque. He is also tied 6 ways from Sunday to the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is a man that the U.S. government, he's profiled in our study, MuslimBrotherhoodInAmerica.com, very heavily relied upon as a source of advice by, among others, the President of the United States, and as one of the people who is used for outreach to the Muslim American community. And so while you're asking questions, one of them might be to renounce the Muslim Brotherhood, to demonstrate in concrete terms, not just Taqiyya, but in concrete terms, that he is in fact not part of that organization, its Sharia agenda, and most especially bringing it here to the United States.
Are they the number one group in their 1991 memorandum?
They are indeed top listed group in their own strategic memorandum. Exactly right. With that, I think we're going to bring this to a close. I want to thank again this terrific panel of women. I appreciate more than I can say your courage, your clarity, your leadership on these issues. I hope that all of you will check out their work, but also the site that we've offered to help elevate it, the Shariah War On Women.org. That and many of the other sites that we've discussed here today are available to you. I hope you'll take advantage of them, and I hope you'll join in defending our country against Sharia in this real war on women. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.